The boy stood at the porch of Tom Brennan's cabin at 11 minutes past 9 on a Wednesday morning in November of 1885, and the first thing that came out of his cracked lips was a question that stopped every grown man inside the room. "Papa Jed, Mama cannot stand up." The boy was 10 years old. His name was Levi Boone Stark. He had walked 6 miles up the North Ridge Road from the town of Bear Hollow, Montana Territory, in the snow, in boots that had not been laced tight at the toe, with a small wool jacket buttoned wrong at the second button, and a small red knit hat that had been sliding down over his right eyebrow for the last 2 miles. He had left the town cabin at 6:30 that morning. He had not, in the 2 hours and 41 minutes since, spoken to any soul. Inside the small front room of Tom Brennan's cabin, the 2 grown men did not, for 2 full seconds, breathe. Jed Stark, 47 years old, was on his knees at the small iron stove, with a length of loose chimney pipe balanced across his own 2 hands. Tom Brennan, 69 years old, was in the small wooden chair beside the stove, a small tin cup of Wednesday morning coffee held halfway to his white beard. The question had come through the porch door before either of them had heard the boy on the step. The boy had not knocked. The boy had not needed to. Jed set the length of chimney pipe down on the small wooden floor. The pipe would sit there unfixed for the rest of the day, the rest of the week, and most of the next Sunday. Tom Brennan set his tin cup down on the small pine stand beside his chair, careful, the way a man sets a cup down when he does not, by his own count of 69 winters, want to hear the same words spoken a second time. Jed took 2 long steps to the door. He pushed the door the rest of the way open, and there Levi was, on the porch, in the low grey morning light, with the snow still falling on the brim of his small red knit hat. Levi's small face was the color of wet ash. His small lips were cracked at the corners. His small mittened hands were held out at his sides, the way a small boy holds his hands out when he has been walking against the wind for a long time and cannot, for the moment, put them down. Snow sat on the tops of his small wool shoulders. Snow sat on his eyelashes. Snow sat in the folds of the wool at his elbows, where he had swung his arms for 6 miles. The boy said it again, because the first time he had said it, his Papa Jed had not moved as fast as Levi's 10-year-old count had said his Papa Jed should have moved. "Papa Jed, Mama cannot stand up. Mama is on the kitchen floor. Mama sent me to find you." Jed Stark went down on one knee, slow, so his own tall body would be at the small boy's own small eye level. He set his big, careful hands, gentle, on the small wool shoulders. The snow melted under his palms. He did not, for the first careful breath, ask any question. He read the small face in front of him first. The face told him 3 things. The face told him that Levi was cold, but not near frozen. The face told him that Levi had been walking hard for hours and had not stopped to rest. And the face told him, in the small, careful, steady brown eyes that had been Clem's own small, careful, steady brown eyes on the boy since 1878, that whatever had happened at the town cabin at 4 in the morning had not, by the boy's own count, been small. "Levi." Jed's voice came low, the way it had always come with the boy. "Tell me quick, when did Mama go down?" 4 in the morning. Mama was mixing the sourdough for the Wednesday boarders. Mama was at the stove. Mama fell against the leg of the iron stove. Mama did not get back up. The small clay crock of sourdough starter had been alive on the back of an iron stove for 27 years. The starter had come from Clem's own mother, Sarah Walking Owl, in 1858. Levi had not thought about the starter in a long time. He was thinking about it now, because he had seen his mama's white apron catch on the front of the iron stove as she went down. Tom Brennan stood up out of his wooden chair. He set his small, careful old hands on his own knees. He said, quiet from behind Jed's shoulder, "Boy, was anyone at the cabin with her?" "No, Mr. Brennan, just me. I got her up on the small braided rug in front of the stove. I put the wool blanket over her. I banked the fire. Mama told me to run to Mrs. Pratt at the dry goods. Mrs. Pratt sent for Dr. Hewitt. Dr. Hewitt said no. Dr. Hewitt said the road was bad. The road is not bad. The road is fine. Mrs. Pratt then said, "Run for Papa Jed." I ran. The boy paused. His small, steady chest was rising and falling in the small, careful, shallow pattern of a boy who had walked 6 miles without stopping and had, by his own count, only one more piece of information to give before he sat down. Mrs. Pratt is with her now. Mrs. Bunting is with her too. Mrs. Bunting brought her boy Charles. Charles is 16. Charles is chopping wood at the lean-to. The women told me they would sit with Mama until I got back with you. They said not to be scared. I was not scared. I ran. I did not stop. He looked at Jed. Papa Jed. Mama could not stand. Mama's face was hot. Mama's white apron had flour on it, and she did not brush the flour off. Mama always brushes the flour off. Jed Stark had lived on the high North Ridge for 14 winters. Jed Stark had been the husband of Clementine Boone Stark for 4 years and 9 months. Jed Stark had loved his big, kind wife every single one of those years without saying it out loud more than 3 times. He was not, in that small, careful porch of Tom Brennan's cabin at 11 minutes past 9 on a Wednesday morning in November, going to lose the count of his own careful breaths. But he did, for the smallest second of his 47 years, feel something inside his own chest tilt over, slow, the way an iron kettle tilts on a stove when the fire under it has burned too hot on one side. He lifted the boy off the porch. He carried Levi inside. He set him on Tom Brennan's own wooden chair beside the small iron stove. He pulled off the small red knit hat. He unbuttoned the wrong-buttoned wool jacket. He pulled off the wet small boots. He set the small wool socks by the fire. He looked at Tom Brennan. Tom Brennan had already been at the kitchen table. Tom Brennan had already pulled down a small tin cup. Tom Brennan had already poured a small, careful splash of the strong morning coffee into it, and had already been at the back of the stove for the small, careful pitcher of fresh cream. Tom Brennan set the small, cream-lightened coffee in Levi's small, mittened hands. "Drink, boy," Tom said, quiet. "Drink slow. Your papa is going to saddle the bay mare. Your papa is going to take you back down the ridge on the bay mare. You are not walking another step today. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mr. Brennan." Jed had already been at the door. He had already picked his fur-lined buckskin coat off the peg by the door. He had already set his brown wool felt hat on his head and on the small, careful porch of Tom Brennan's cabin before he took the first step down toward the small lean to where the bay mare stood eating her Wednesday morning hay. Jed Stark stopped for one long second. He set his big, careful hand, slow, on the small wooden porch rail. He said one word out loud to the November morning above him. He said the word so low that the boy at the small iron stove did not hear it, and the old man at the coffee pot did not hear it. He said the word for himself. "Clem." Then he went. He saddled the bay mare, and the ride, by his own hard, careful count, was going to take 1 hour and 10 minutes. To understand what Levi Boone Stark had walked away from that Wednesday morning, you have to know what the kitchen of the cabin at the south end of Main Street of Bear Hollow had looked like at 4 in the morning. Clementine Boone Stark had been at the iron stove of that kitchen for 4 hours by the time she fell. She had been up since 11 at night the day before, because the sourdough for the Wednesday boarders at the Pratt boarding kitchen had to be started at 11 and had to be turned every hour until the dough was ready to go into the small wood cradle to rise. That was Clem's own careful arithmetic. That was the arithmetic she had been using at the Pratt boarding kitchen for the 12 years since she had come to Bear Hollow with her husband Daniel Boone in the summer of 1873. Remember, Clem was 40 years old that November. She had been a big woman all her life, broad-shouldered, full-figured, size 20 in her prairie dresses since her 30th year, thick, strong arms that had lifted a bushel of flour to the high shelf of the boarding kitchen with one hand every Monday morning for 12 winters. Her hair was dark, low-knotted at the nape of her neck, with the first gray at the temples since the winter of 1883. Her face was round and warm and steady. She wore, that Wednesday morning, the wine-red prairie dress she had been wearing since Levi had been 3, and the clean white cotton apron tied at the small of her broad back with the long, careful bow. She had never, in the 10 years of Levi's memory, been too weak to stand up from a kitchen floor. Levi had come down the small, careful stairs from his own small, careful bed at 4 in the morning because he had heard the fall. The fall had been the sound of a big woman going down against the leg of an iron stove. The fall had been the sound of a copper mixing bowl hitting the pine floor. The fall had been the sound of the small wooden spoon slipping out of Mama's own strong, full hand. Levi had come into the kitchen in his own small, careful nightshirt and bare feet. He had seen Mama on the floor. He had not screamed. He had not cried. He had gone down on his own small, careful knees beside Mama's own broad, slack shoulders. He had lifted her head, careful, into his own small lap. He had said, "Mama." Clem had opened her small, tired brown eyes for one careful second. Her big, careful hand had reached up. Her hand had found Levi's own small, careful cheek. She had said, in a voice Levi had not heard from his mama before, "Sweetness, get the wool blanket off the back of my chair. Cover me. Bank the fire." Then, Levi, run to Mrs. Pratt. He had done what his mama told him to do. He had done every step in the order she had said. He had brought the wool blanket. He had banked the fire in the iron stove. He had put his own small wool coat on over the small nightshirt. He had put his boots on. He had run the 2 blocks north on Main Street to the Pratt house at the back of the dry goods store. He had banged the front door of the Pratts at 4:40 in the morning. Mrs. Sarah Pratt had come to the door in her own thick wool wrapper with her own grey hair still in the small, careful night braid. She had taken one look at Levi's face. She had not asked any question. She had put on her own boots. She had put on her own coat. She had walked the 2 blocks back with Levi to the town cabin at the south end of Main Street. Sarah had seen Clem on the kitchen floor. Sarah had gone down, slow, on her own 63-year-old knees. Sarah had felt Clem's forehead. Sarah had felt Clem's pulse under the angle of Clem's jaw. Sarah had listened to Clem's own careful, shallow breath. Sarah had lifted her small, round, grey head. Sarah had looked at Levi with the small, careful, steady eyes of the woman who had been the second mother of Bear Hollow for 31 years. "Levi," Sarah had said, quiet, "your mama has come down with a pneumonia. The pneumonia is in her chest. It is not, by my count, the worst kind. It is not, by my count, the smallest kind either. Your mama needs a real doctor at her side by noon. Dr. Hewitt is the only real doctor in this town. You will run to Dr. Hewitt's house. You will knock on his door. You will not leave his porch until he says yes or no. You will remember what he says. You will come back to me. Do you understand?" Levi had understood. Levi had run the 3 blocks south on Main Street to Dr. Albert Hewitt's small, careful house at the south end of the wooden walk. Levi had banged on the small, careful front door at 5:05 in the morning. Mrs. Hewitt had come to the door in her own small, careful night wrapper. Mrs. Hewitt had said the doctor was asleep. Levi had said the cook of the Pratt boarding kitchen was on the kitchen floor of the south end cabin and could not stand up. Mrs. Hewitt had gone up the small, careful stairs. Mrs. Hewitt had come back down. Mrs. Hewitt had said, in the small, careful, high voice she used at the small, careful Ladies' Aid Society on Tuesdays, "The doctor sends his regrets. The doctor says the road on Main Street is too bad this morning. The doctor will send word around noon." Levi had stood on that porch for one long second. He was 10 years old. He was, by his own count of his own 10 years, not a boy who called grown people liars. He had said, "Careful," to Mrs. Hewitt. "The road is fine, ma'am. The road is not bad. I just ran 3 blocks on the road. I am 10. The road is not too bad for a doctor of 48. Mrs. Hewitt had shut the front door. Levi had run back to the town cabin. He had told Mrs. Pratt what Mrs. Hewitt had said. Mrs. Pratt had said, in a voice Levi had not heard from Mrs. Pratt in 6 years, "Dr. Hewitt is a coward." Mrs. Pratt had not said, in her 63 years, anything worse than coward, out loud in front of any child. That morning she said it. Levi filed it away in his small, careful memory. He would tell his Papa Jed about it 2 days later at the small back kitchen table of the boarding kitchen. His Papa Jed would not, on that Friday night, be surprised. By 5:30, Mrs. Camilla Bunting, the wife of the smithy Mr. Jacob Bender, had come next door on Sarah's small hand lantern signal. Mrs. Bunting had brought her big son Charles, 16 years old, whose small, careful right palm still carried the small white scar of the 4 stitches Clem had closed at Jed's own cabin on the 2nd Tuesday of February in 1881. Charles had said nothing. Charles had gone straight to the small lean-to at the side of the town cabin. Charles had begun to split wood for the iron stove that would need to burn hot for a long time. Sarah Pratt had sat down beside Clem on the kitchen floor. Sarah had lifted Clem's own head into Sarah's own lap. Sarah had said, "Lo," to Levi, "Sweetness, come here." Levi had come to Sarah's side. "You are going to do the hardest thing you have ever done in your 10 years, Sarah had said. "You are going to walk up the North Ridge Road right now. You are going to go find your Papa Jed. Your Papa Jed is at Tom Brennan's cabin fixing the chimney pipe. That is 6 miles. You are going to walk it in the snow. You are going to walk it because Dr. Hewitt is a coward, and because the only 2 people in this valley who can help your mama are your Papa Jed and the Cheyenne grandfather Walking Bear. And Walking Bear is at the winter camp 4 miles up the West Creek, and my knees will not, at 63, carry me up either. Your Papa Jed can ride down in an hour. Walking Bear will need 3. You are going for your Papa Jed. Do you understand?" Levi had understood. He had put on his own small wool jacket. He had missed the 2nd button because his own small mittened hands had begun to shake. Mrs. Bunting had knelt in front of him and had rebuttoned the jacket. Mrs. Bunting had said, "Kind, Levi Stark, you are a very brave boy. I am 52. I have never seen a braver small boy of 10 in this town." Levi had not smiled. Levi had put on his boots. Levi had not laced them tight enough at the toe. Levi had put on his small red knit hat. Mrs. Sarah Pratt had bent down. She had kissed him on the top of the small red knit hat. She had said, "Run when you can. Walk when you can't run. Do not stop. Do not sit down. If you sit down, sweetness, you will not get back up. Your mama will be here. I will be here." Levi had gone out the front door of the town cabin at 6:30 in the morning. That was what the boy had walked away from. That was what he was, at 11:12 on the same Wednesday morning, telling his Papa Jed on the small snowy porch of Tom Brennan's cabin, 6 miles up the North Ridge. Levi Boone Stark had been the son of Nathan and Rebecca Boone of the small black settlement on the South Fork Road of Bear Hollow. Nathan had been a freight yard hand. Rebecca had been a laundress. Nathan and Rebecca had come west from Topeka, Kansas, in the spring of 1875, with a wagon and 1 small careful child of 6 months. Levi did not remember Nathan and Rebecca. He had been 3 years old in the summer of 1878, when the typhoid had come down the South Fork Road with a bad barrel of water from the upper creek. The typhoid had taken his father, his mother, both his father's brothers, and 11 of the 27 souls in the South Fork settlement in 9 hot August days. The typhoid had not, by the small careful arithmetic that had never made any sense to Levi in his own 10 years of thinking about it, taken him. Clementine Boone had come out to the South Fork Road on the 4th day of the sickness, with her cast-iron skillet, and her white apron, and her leather medicine bag, and her clay jar of dried yarrow. Clem had cooked. Clem had brewed. Clem had sat at bedsides. On the last day of the sickness, Clem had walked out of the small, careful log cabin of Rebecca Boone with a small, careful 3-year-old boy in her own strong, full arms. Clem had walked him the 3 miles back to the small town cabin at the south end of Main Street. Clem had said to her own husband Daniel that night, at their small, careful kitchen table, "Daniel, this is Levi. Levi lives with us now." Daniel Boone had set his own careful fork down. Daniel had said, "Kind, then he is our boy." Daniel had lived 1 more year. Daniel had died in the freight yard in the spring of 1879, when a runaway team of 6 mules had turned a loaded wagon over on top of him. Daniel had been 39. Clem had been 34. Levi had been 4. The years between Daniel's death and the November morning of 1885, when Levi walked 6 miles up the North Ridge for his Papa Jed, had been the years of a small, careful widowed black boy being raised by a big, kind cook widow in a small, careful frontier town. Remember the year 1879. Levi remembered his first meeting with the tall mountain man on the 18th of November, 1879. Levi had been 5. Jed had ridden down off the ridge at sunset, with the smell of old Tom Brennan's near death on his own careful brown wool coat. Jed had stood at Clem's front gate. Levi had been on the small braided rug by the iron stove, drawing a small careful picture on the back of a flour sack. That night, and every Friday night at the small back kitchen table of the Pratt boarding kitchen for the 52 Fridays after, Levi had watched the tall mountain man look at his own small careful mama across the small worn wood of the table. Levi had seen the look land. Levi was 5, then 6, then 7. Levi was not, by his own small careful count of the small quiet Fridays, a slow boy. He had watched Papa Jed hire his mama for one winter of Tuesday cooking at the Ridge cabin. He had ridden up with his mama on the small grey gelding Patrick with the small white blaze on his forehead for 15 careful Tuesdays. He had played with the small black dog Holler on the small porch. He had eaten the small careful goose Papa Jed had cooked for the Christmas of 1880 at his own iron stove. He had, on the second Tuesday of February of 1881, watched his mama close 4 small careful stitches on the small careful right palm of Charles Bunting, who was 11 then and 16 now, and was, at that same hour, chopping wood at the lean-to of the town cabin for his mama's own care. Remember the 22nd of February of 1881. Levi had come into the Ridge cabin at the moment Papa Jed had asked his mama a question. Levi had said one small, careful sentence in his small, steady voice. "Mr. Stark, may I by my own count call you Papa Jed now?" Papa Jed had said yes. That had been 4 years and 9 months before Levi's own 6-mile walk in the snow to get him. Levi had been Levi Boone Stark since the small, careful Sunday morning of the 2nd of June of 1881, when the Reverend Tobias Marsh of the small Methodist church at the north end of Main Street had signed the small, careful adoption papers Papa Jed had ridden all the way to Helena in April to have drawn up. The papers made Papa Jed the second father the small, careful black boy had ever had. The papers made Levi a Stark by name and a Boone by his birth mother's line, and by the small, careful arithmetic of the 2 names put together, made him, on all his own school books at the small, careful log school at the south end of Main Street, Levi Boone Stark. The years after had been quiet years. Papa Jed had come down off the ridge in the small, careful summer of 1881 and had built a small, careful new second room on the back of the town cabin at the south end of Main Street for Papa Jed and Mama's own small, careful bed. Papa Jed had built the small, careful room himself in 6 weeks with the milled cedar he had brought down from his own careful mill on the ridge. Levi had helped. Levi had held the small careful nails at 3 years and 7 months and had gained 4 inches of height by the time the small careful room was done, and Papa Jed had said, "Levi, you will grow taller than me." The Stark family had lived at the town cabin from October through April for the school years. The Stark family had gone up to the Ridge cabin for May through September for the summers. Papa Jed had kept the Ridge cabin stocked. Mama had kept the town cabin's kitchen and the boarding kitchen and the small back 4th chair at the small back kitchen table on Fridays. Old Tom Brennan had lived at his own cabin 2 miles below Papa Jed's and had come down for the small back Friday supper at 6 until his knees had gone bad in the autumn of 1884, after which Papa Jed had begun to ride up 2 miles below his own Ridge cabin every Tuesday afternoon to bring old Tom his supper, and had brought old Tom down to the town on the Fridays he could still ride down. That was where the boy came from. That was who he had been at 6:30 in the morning of the Wednesday when Sarah Pratt had bent down to kiss the top of his small red knit hat and had told him to run when he could and walk when he could not. He had run when he could. He had walked when he could not. He had done, on his 10-year-old feet in the November snow, all 6 miles. And now he was in Tom Brennan's small front room, with a small tin cup of cream-lightened coffee, in his own small mittened hands, and his own Papa Jed had saddled the bay mare at the small careful lean-to, and had come back to the porch, and had said, Levi, now. The ride down the ridge took an hour and 11 minutes. The bay mare had been in the small, careful lean-to since 4 in the morning. She was rested. She was hungry to move. Papa Jed sat behind Levi on the bay mare. Papa Jed's fur-lined buckskin coat was open at the front. Papa Jed had wrapped Levi inside the coat against his own big warm chest. Levi's small mittened hands were held in Papa Jed's own careful right hand at the small careful reins. Levi's small booted feet dangled just above the small careful horn of the saddle. The road was easier going down than it had been coming up. The road was still 6 miles. The snow had let up a little. The wind was at their backs. The bay mare knew the road. The bay mare walked at a slow, careful ground-eating pace that Papa Jed had, by his own 11 years of using the bay mare on this road, taught her. Levi did not talk for the first 2 miles. He did not have anything to say. He had said the thing he had walked 6 miles to say. His Papa Jed had heard it. Papa Jed had listened. Papa Jed was, at this very careful minute, riding him back down as fast as an old bay mare could carry a small, tired boy of 10 and a tall mountain man of 47 without breaking any of the 3. At the 2-mile mark, past the small, careful log cabins of the 4 black families on the South Fork Road, Levi said one careful sentence to his own Papa Jed. "Papa Jed, remember the first time I saw you?" Papa Jed set his big, careful gloved hand, gentle, on the top of the small red knit hat. "I remember, sweetness." Levi had been 5. Levi had been on the small braided rug in front of the iron stove of the small town cabin at the south end of Main Street. Levi had been drawing a picture on the back of an old flour sack with a small, careful stub of pencil his mama had given him for his own small, careful 5th birthday in September. The picture had been of a small bear. Levi had thought, for the whole of his 5-year-old life until that November evening, that his own dead father, Nathan Boone, had been the tallest man he was ever going to know. Nathan had been 6 feet even. That was, by Levi's own small, careful memory, tall. Then his mama had opened the front door, and the tall mountain man had stood at the gate, and the tall mountain man had been 6 feet and 2 inches tall in his own tall, careful boots, and his fur-lined buckskin coat, and Levi had thought, from the small braided rug by the iron stove, that the tall mountain man had, by the small careful arithmetic of a 5-year-old at the iron stove, been the tallest man Levi had ever seen. Levi had not stopped drawing. Levi had, in his own small careful lap, changed the picture. The small bear on the back of the flour sack had grown a small careful mountain man's coat. That was the first time Levi had seen his Papa Jed. That was the picture Levi had drawn on the back of the flour sack. That was the picture Levi's own mama had kept, folded careful, in her own small carved oak box on the mantel above the iron stove of the town cabin, from that day to this one. At the 3-mile mark, Papa Jed said, very low into the small red knit hat, "Levi, tell me the truth. Was your mama already too weak to stand when she sent you to Mrs. Pratt?" "Yes, Papa Jed." "Was your mama already too weak to stand when Mrs. Pratt came to the town cabin?" "Yes, Papa Jed." "Was your mama already too weak to sit up when Mrs. Bunting came?" "Yes, Papa Jed." "Was your mama on her side against the leg of the iron stove, or on her back?" "On her side, Papa Jed." Mrs. Pratt turned her onto her back on the small braided rug. Mrs. Pratt put the pillow off my own small bed under her head. Mrs. Bunting put the small clean linen with cold water on her forehead. Charles brought in 3 loads of wood for the small iron stove. "The iron stove is going hot. The kitchen is warm." Papa Jed did not say anything for one careful long second. Papa Jed set his big careful chin, soft, on the top of the small red knit hat. Papa Jed said, very low, "Levi, you did everything right. You did more than any boy of 10 in this valley has ever done. I will not forget it. Your mama will not forget it. Nobody in this town will forget it." Papa Jed. "Yes, sweetness. Is Mama going to die?" The question came out of the small, careful mouth, the way any small, careful question comes out of any small, careful mouth at the 3-mile mark of any small, careful ride. The question was not, by the 10-year-old count, dramatic. The question was the small, careful, practical question, a small, careful, practical boy of 10 who had already lost one mother to typhoid at 3 years old, who had already lost his first father to a runaway wagon, who had already lost his own second grandfather, old Tom Brennan, almost to pneumonia in November of 1879, had, in his own small, careful, practical way, been carrying at the back of his own throat for the 6-mile walk. Papa Jed did not lie to the boy. Papa Jed never had. Papa Jed did not, at the 3-mile mark of the ride down, start. "Your mama has a bad pneumonia, Levi. The kind of pneumonia your mama has can kill a woman of 40. It does not always. It kills fewer women than it saves. Your mama is a strong woman. Your mama is a big, kind, strong woman. Your mama has been carrying you and me and this cabin and this town for 4 years and 9 months. Your mama has caught 83 babies at the South Fork Road and the Upper Creek and the Chinese Laundry since 1875. Your mama's own body has, by my own count of your mama's own arithmetic, more strength in it than most women of 40 in this valley have. Your mama will fight this pneumonia. Your mama will, by my own count, win. But the pneumonia does not, by the small, careful arithmetic of any doctor in Helena, always let the fighter win. Sometimes the pneumonia takes the fighter. I would not, by my own count, lie to you about that. So the answer to your question, sweetness, is that we do not know today. We will know by Friday." Levi took the answer in the way a boy of 10 takes an answer. He set the answer down inside himself, careful. He did not cry. He did not, in the small, careful way of a small, careful boy who has been raised by a big, kind cook and a tall, quiet mountain man, ask any second question. The bay mare kept walking. The road went past the small, careful log cabin of Mr. Elias Weaver of the South Fork Road, whose wife Clem had caught 2 babies for in 1881 and 1883. The road went past the small, careful smithy of Mr. Jacob Bender. The road went past the small, careful log school where Levi had been in his 5th year of learning to read at the hand of Mrs. Lottie Marsh. The road went past the small, careful Methodist parsonage where the Reverend Tobias Marsh, 64 years old that November, was already standing at his own front window because Sarah Pratt had sent a small, careful note by the bunting boy Charles at 7 in the morning. The road came into Main Street. Main Street was Wednesday morning quiet. The freight wagons at Hiram Foley's depot were standing in the fresh snow. The Pratt dry goods sign was swinging small on its own careful hinge in the low, careful wind. The bay mare turned left off Main Street at the small, careful south end. The bay mare walked the last small, careful 2 blocks to the small, careful cabin at the south end of Main Street. The bay mare stopped at the small, careful front gate. The front door of the small, careful cabin was open a crack. Papa Jed swung down off the bay mare. Papa Jed lifted Levi down off the bay mare. Papa Jed held Levi's own small, mittened hand. They walked up the small, careful porch step together. Sarah Pratt was at the front door before Papa Jed and Levi were at the top of the porch step. Sarah Pratt had heard the bay mare turn off Main Street. Sarah Pratt was in her thick wool coat over her plain gray dress. Sarah Pratt's small, careful eyes were red at the corners. She did not, that morning, waste a single word. "Jed, she is alive. The fever is at 104. The chest is bad. She has not been awake since 6:30. Camilla Bunting is at her side. Charles Bunting has kept the stove going. Hiram Foley rode out for Walking Bear at 7:30. Hiram will be back by 2 with the Cheyenne grandfather if Walking Bear can travel. Dr. Hewitt is a coward, and I will say so at the next council meeting. Come in." Papa Jed came in. The town cabin at the south end of Main Street was the cabin Papa Jed had built the small, careful second room onto in the summer of 1881. The town cabin was warm. The iron stove at the back wall of the front room was going hot. The cast iron skillet with the small SWO carved in the handle was set to the back of the stove. Cold, because no cooking had been done in the 4 hours since Sarah Pratt had come. The small clay crock of sourdough starter that had been alive since 1858 was, by Sarah's own careful morning arithmetic, set on the warm side of the stove so that it would keep. The kettle on the back was at the slow simmer of a kettle that had been kept simmering by careful hands who did not want the water in it to go cold. The braided rug in front of the iron stove held Clem. Papa Jed went down on both his own careful knees at Clem's side. His own big brave wife was on her back on the braided rug. The wine-red prairie dress was open at the throat. The white cotton apron had been untied at the back and folded and set beside her. Careful, by Mrs. Camilla Bunting, because Sarah had said the apron would hold the flour of Wednesday morning until the last day of Clem's life, and Camilla had, in her own kind way, agreed. Clem's dark hair had come out of its low knot at the nape of her neck and lay in a small, careful spill across the pillow off Levi's small bed. Her broad shoulders were slack. Her full round face was flushed with the fever. Her generous soft frame, the frame that had lifted a bushel of flour to a high shelf every Monday morning for 12 winters, was, that Wednesday morning, still. Her strong, full arms lay at her sides. Her big, kind hands, the hands that had made bread for 83 boarders every week of the last 12 years, were at rest for the first time Levi had ever seen his mama's hands at rest, at a kitchen stove in the daytime. Papa Jed did not, for one long second, say a word. He set his own big, careful right hand on Clem's own left hand. He set his other hand on Clem's forehead. He did not, in front of Levi, cry. Levi was watching. Papa Jed knew. Mrs. Camilla Bunting was on the small wooden chair at the kitchen table. Mrs. Bunting had a small, clean linen in her hands. The linen was cold. Mrs. Bunting had been changing the cold linen at Clem's forehead every 6 minutes for the last 3.5 hours. Charles Bunting was outside at the lean-to. The sound of the small, careful axe had been going on for 2 hours. Papa Jed said, low to Sarah, "How is her chest?" "Bad, Jed. Not the worst I have heard. Bad. Congested. Wet. She is not, by my count, at pneumonia's last hour. She is at pneumonia's middle hour. If we hold her through the middle, we get her through." Sarah Pratt had grown up on a small farm outside Springfield, Illinois. Sarah's own mother had been the small, careful country midwife of that country for 30 years. Sarah's own arithmetic on a sick chest was, by any account in Bear Hollow, second only to Clem's own. Papa Jed nodded. Papa Jed set his own big, careful hand, soft, on Clem's own careful forehead. Papa Jed leaned down. Papa Jed set his own beard, gentle, against Clem's own warm cheek. Papa Jed said, low into his own big, brave wife's own careful ear, one careful sentence. "Clem, I am home. Levi walked 6 miles. You do not, by my count, get to leave. Not today." Clem, on the braided rug in front of the iron stove, did not open her eyes. But the small, careful muscle at the corner of Clem's own tired mouth moved by the smallest possible amount. It was not, by the small, careful count of any doctor in Helena, a smile. It was, by the small, careful count of the tall, quiet man of 47 at the side of his own big, brave wife, an answer. Papa Jed stood up. Papa Jed rolled up the sleeves of his brown wool work shirt. Papa Jed took the small, careful, clean linen out of Mrs. Bunting's hands. "Camilla, I will take the forehead. I will take it for the next 4 hours. Sarah, I need you to write down a small list. The list is what you will need for a bread mustard poultice for the chest. I will need dry mustard flour, dry ground ginger, plain white flour, a clean square of muslin, and a small clay pot of hot water. If Sarah does not have any of it in her own kitchen, Charles will run to the Pratt boarding kitchen for it. Sarah, have you a bread mustard poultice recipe?" "I have my mother's, Jed." "Then we will use your mother's." Sarah Pratt went to the kitchen table. Sarah took Levi's own school pencil out of Levi's own school notebook. Sarah wrote the list. Papa Jed knelt beside his big, brave wife, with the clean, cold linen in his own big, careful hands. He set the linen, gentle, on her forehead. He took the small, careful pulse under the angle of her jaw with his own 2 fingers. He counted her small, careful breath. He did not, for the next 4 hours, take his own eyes off her big, kind face. Levi sat down at the kitchen table across from Sarah Pratt. Levi picked up his own small mug of tea Sarah had poured for him. Levi looked at his own Papa Jed, at his own mama's own side. Levi looked at his own mama on the braided rug. Levi looked back at Sarah. Levi said, very quiet, Mrs. Pratt. Sarah looked up from her small, careful list. Yes, sweetness. Mrs. Pratt. Papa Jed came. Papa Jed came, sweetness. Because you walked 6 miles. Mrs. Pratt. Yes, Mrs. Pratt. May I sit at Mama's feet? Sarah Pratt set the small pencil down. Sweetness. You may. Levi climbed off the small wooden chair. Levi walked, slow and careful, the 4 steps from the kitchen table to the braided rug in front of the iron stove. Levi sat down at his mama's feet. Levi set his own small mittened hands, gentle, on his mama's own left ankle over the warm wool blanket. He did not move for the next 4 hours. By noon on the Wednesday, half the town of Bear Hollow, Montana, had heard the news that Clementine Boone Stark was on the kitchen floor of the South End cabin, that the doctor had refused to come, and that Levi Boone Stark had walked 6 miles in the snow at 10 years old to get his Papa Jed off the ridge. At 1:30 in the afternoon, the Reverend Tobias Marsh, of the small Methodist church at the north end of Main Street, knocked on the front door of the South End cabin. Sarah Pratt opened the door. The Reverend Marsh had his own small, careful King James Bible in his own careful hand and his own careful round black hat in the other. He was 64 that November. He was Welsh. He was small and round and warm in the way small, round, warm Welshmen are. Sarah, he said, quiet. May I come in? Come in, Reverend. He came in. He set his hat on the peg by the door. He walked, slow and steady, to the braided rug in front of the iron stove. He knelt, slow and steady, on his own small round Welsh knees at Clem's other side across from Papa Jed. He set his own kind hand, soft, on Clem's own careful forehead. He said, low, one small careful sentence in Welsh that no one in the room except Papa Jed had ever heard the Reverend say out loud before. Then he opened his own small careful Bible. Jed, Sarah, Levi, Camilla, Charles at the lean-to. I have come, this Wednesday afternoon, because I have heard what you have heard. I have come because I have already spoken to Dr. Hewitt at his own small, careful house at noon. I have told Dr. Hewitt that the road on Main Street is not, by my own careful walk from the parsonage this morning, too bad for a doctor of 48. I have told Dr. Hewitt that if he does not rise from his own small, careful supper table today, put on his own small, careful boots, and walk the 6 blocks north to this cabin by 3 this afternoon, I will preach next Sunday from the 17th verse of the 2nd chapter of the Gospel of Mark, for the 2nd time. Dr. Hewitt has not, by his own careful account of the small, careful courtroom in Helena, forgotten what I preached from that verse in July of 1880. Dr. Hewitt will, by my own count of his own small, careful conscience, be at the door of this cabin by 3. Papa Jed did not lift his own eyes off his big, brave wife's face. Papa Jed said, very low, Reverend Marsh. Yes, Jed. Thank you. The Reverend Marsh did not say anything for one long, careful second. Then he began, in his own slow, small, careful Welsh reading voice, to read a small, careful verse from the 13th chapter of the first letter of Paul to the Corinthians in the small, careful King James of the English Bible. Charity suffereth long, and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Charity never faileth. He read it slow. He read it careful. He read it the way a small, round, warm Welsh Methodist minister of 64 reads a small, careful verse to a big, brave woman he had married, a tall, quiet man too, at the small, careful Methodist church, at the north end of Main Street, on the 27th of February of 1881. He closed the small, careful Bible. He set his own kind hand, one more time, on Clem's own careful forehead. He said, low, Clem Stark, you have carried this town for 12 years. You have carried the small, careful child at your feet since he was 3. You have carried the tall, quiet man at your side since the November of 1879. It is our turn to carry you. You do not, by any careful reading of any small, careful chapter, have to carry us this afternoon. You may rest. You may fight. You may sleep. We will hold. Amen. He stood up. He put his hand on Levi's small red knit hat, which Levi had not, in all the 4 hours at his mama's feet, taken off. He said, "Levi Boone Stark, you will grow up to be a good man. I have seen many small, careful men of 10 in my 64 years. You are the small, careful, bravest of them." Levi looked up. Levi said, "Quiet, Reverend Marsh." "Yes, sweetness. Reverend Marsh. Will Dr. Hewitt come at 3? The Reverend Marsh smiled the small, careful Welsh smile that had been his own careful weapon in the small, careful pulpit for the last 31 years. "Levi, Dr. Hewitt will come at 3. I would bet by my own small, careful account of a Methodist minister's account, my own small, careful new pair of Sunday boots on it." Dr. Albert Hewitt came at 8 minutes past 3 that afternoon. He came alone. He carried his own small, careful black bag. He was wearing his own small, careful black wool coat and his own small, careful round black hat. His face was the color of an old tin plate. Sarah Pratt opened the door. Sarah did not, that afternoon, say a word to Dr. Hewitt. Sarah stepped aside. Dr. Hewitt walked, slow and careful, to the braided rug in front of the iron stove. He set his own small, careful black bag down on the kitchen table. He knelt, slow and careful, on his own small, careful old knees at Clem's own side across from Papa Jed. Dr. Hewitt did not, for one long, careful second, look at Papa Jed's face. Dr. Hewitt looked at Clem's own forehead. Dr. Hewitt took Clem's own careful pulse. Dr. Hewitt listened to Clem's own careful chest, with his own small, careful wooden stethoscope. Dr. Hewitt lifted his own head. He said, in a voice Papa Jed had not, in 8 years of council meetings, heard Dr. Hewitt use, "Mr. Stark, Mrs. Stark has pneumonia in both lower lobes. The fever is at 104. The chest is congested but not yet consolidated. I have with me carbolic, quinine, and a small careful vial of morphine for the small careful pain of the chest. I would, with your leave and hers, administer them. I would, with your leave, also stay at her side through the night. I would leave your cabin only when the fever has broken. I would not, by my count of any morning of the rest of my own careful life, leave until it has." Papa Jed lifted his own eyes off his big, brave wife's face for the first time in 5 hours. Papa Jed looked at Dr. Hewitt across the braided rug. Papa Jed said, very low, "Dr. Hewitt." "Yes, Mr. Stark. You have my leave. You have hers. You will not sit at my table. You will kneel at hers. When she wakes up, you will not speak to her until she speaks to you first. If she wants you gone, you will be gone. If she wants you to stay, you will stay. Are we agreed?" "We are agreed, Mr. Stark." "Then work, Doctor." Dr. Hewitt worked. The carbolic went into the poultice Sarah had bread mustard ready at the kitchen table. The quinine went into a small, careful drop under Clem's own dry tongue by Dr. Hewitt's own careful small hand. The morphine did not go in that afternoon. Dr. Hewitt set the small, careful vial on the kitchen table and said the vial was for the small, careful moment the pain in the chest woke Clem before the fever did. At 5:30 in the afternoon, the front door of the South End cabin opened one more time. Walking Bear of the small Cheyenne family camp at the Upper Creek came through the door with Hiram Foley behind him. Walking Bear was 71 that November. Walking Bear had ridden 4 miles on a small, careful pony down the West Creek in the snow. Walking Bear had brought a small, careful clay jar of dried yarrow from his own careful bee-tree garden. Walking Bear had come without being told. Walking Bear had heard from a small, careful Cheyenne boy at the freight depot at 3 in the afternoon. Walking Bear knelt, slow and careful, on his own 71-year-old knees on the other side of Clem's own head from Dr. Hewitt. The Cheyenne grandfather and the town doctor did not, in that first careful second at the small, careful rug, speak. Then Dr. Hewitt said, very low, "Walking Bear." Walking Bear said, "Dr. Hewitt." Dr. Hewitt said, "I would, this evening, take your careful counsel on the small, careful poultice." Walking Bear said, Dr. Hewitt, my careful counsel is yours." The two of them, side by side, went to work on the big brave wife of the tall, quiet mountain man for the long, careful night ahead. The long night at the South End cabin of Bear Hollow, Montana, on the Wednesday of November of 1885, was the longest night any of the 6 grown people at that cabin had lived through in more than 5 years. Sarah Pratt held the kettle. Sarah's kettle was at a slow simmer on the back of the iron stove from 6 that evening until 6 the next morning. Sarah's own small, careful bread mustard poultice was renewed on Clem's own careful chest every 90 minutes on the 90-minute count Dr. Hewitt had set. Sarah was, by her own quiet count, doing the work of a woman of 43 at 63. Sarah did not complain, and Sarah's husband, Edmund Pratt, who had come over at 7 that evening with a small, careful pan of hot supper for the 6 grown people at the cabin, did not ask Sarah to. Camilla Bunting stayed until midnight. Camilla knew, by her own account, when a house had passed from needing many hands to needing 4. At midnight, Camilla stood up from the kitchen table, kissed Levi on the top of his own small red knit hat that he had not, all evening, taken off, and walked home to her own small, careful house next door to the smithy. Camilla told her husband Jacob at the small, careful kitchen table that if the cook of the Pratt boarding kitchen died that night, Camilla would not, for the rest of her own careful life, forgive Dr. Hewitt for the small, careful 5 hours of the morning. Camilla went to bed. Camilla did not sleep. Charles Bunting, 16, stayed at the lean-to until 11 at night, splitting wood for the iron stove. At 11, Papa Jed came out of the cabin. Papa Jed set his big, careful hand on Charles's own small, careful shoulder. Papa Jed said, "Quiet. Charles, go home. Sleep. Your mother needs to see you in the morning. There is enough wood. There has been enough wood for 2 hours. You have done a man's day of work. You will be a man in this valley for a long time. Go." Charles put down the axe. Charles went home. Charles told his own mother Camilla at the kitchen table what Papa Jed had said. Camilla, who had been thinking about the small, careful pneumonia, sat down on the small, careful kitchen chair and put her own hands over her own face and cried, "Quiet," for one small, careful minute. Then Camilla stood up and made her own boy a small, careful hot cup of milk with a small, careful drop of honey and put him to bed in his own small, careful room at 11:30 at night. At the South End cabin, the 4 grown people who stayed after midnight were Papa Jed, Sarah Pratt, Dr. Albert Hewitt, and Walking Bear. Levi did not, by any adult's count as a grown person. Levi was 10. But Levi stayed at his mama's feet on the braided rug the entire night. Levi did not sleep. Levi did not eat the small, careful cornbread Sarah brought him at 10. Levi did not, for the whole of the long, careful night, take his own small, careful hand off his mama's own left ankle. At 1 in the morning, Clem's fever climbed to 104.4. Dr. Hewitt made the small, careful decision to open the small, careful vial of morphine. He gave Clem one small, careful drop under her own dry tongue. He said, low, to Papa Jed, "The morphine will let her sleep through the small, careful pain in the chest. Sleep is what her body needs. Sleep will let the poultice work. Sleep will let the fever break." Papa Jed nodded. At 2 in the morning, Walking Bear brewed a small, careful tea from the yarrow he had carried down from the upper creek. Walking Bear added a small, careful drop of the wild honey from his own careful bee tree. Walking Bear held Clem's own head, gentle, in his own 71-year-old lap. Walking Bear tipped a small, careful spoonful of the warm tea against Clem's own dry, cracked lips. The tea went in. At 3 in the morning, Clem's fever had come down to 103.8. At 4 in the morning, the fever was at 103.4. At 5 in the morning, the fever was at 103 even. At 5:30 in the morning, in the very quiet, careful moment before the first grey light of the Thursday sky came in through the small, careful east window of the town cabin, Clem opened her own tired brown eyes. She did not, for the first 2 careful seconds, know where she was. Then her own eyes found Levi at her own feet. Levi was awake. Levi had been awake for 23 hours. Levi's small mittened hands were on her own left ankle over the warm wool blanket. Clem said, low and slow and dry, one careful word. Sweetness. Levi did not move. Levi did not, at his own 10 years, know if his mama had opened her eyes on his own careful account, or on the small careful arithmetic of her own body. Levi lifted his own small careful face, slow, from where it had been resting on his own small careful hand, at the top of his mama's own left knee. "Mama?" Papa Jed, who had been kneeling at Clem's own head for the 14 careful hours since he had walked through the front door at 9:30 in the morning of the Wednesday, set his own big careful right hand on his big brave wife's own left hand. Papa Jed said, in a voice Levi and Sarah and Dr. Hewitt and Walking Bear had never before heard the tall, quiet mountain man use. Clem. Clem's own eyes, tired and slow, turned from Levi's small, careful face at her own feet to Papa Jed's own big, careful face at her own head. Clem said, low and slow and dry. "Jed," Papa Jed said. "Clem, Levi walked 6 miles." Clem said, low and slow and dry. "I know." Clem said, low and slow and dry. "I heard." Clem said, low and slow and dry. "Sarah told me at 7 in the morning. I was not, by my count, all the way gone. I was, by my count, halfway. I heard," Papa Jed said, very low. "Clem." Clem said, "Jed, sweetness. I did not leave. I fought. I fought because Levi walked. I fought because you were coming. I fought because Sarah was here." She paused for one careful long second. Her breath was slow. Her breath was steady. Her breath was, by Dr. Hewitt's own careful count at the small, careful chest, the breath of a woman whose pneumonia had begun to break at 3 in the morning, and had, by 5:30 in the morning, given up its own careful worst. She said, low and slow and dry, one more careful sentence. Dr. Hewitt, Dr. Albert Hewitt, who had been kneeling at her own left side for the last 14 hours and 40 minutes, did not lift his own head. "Yes, Mrs. Stark." "Dr. Hewitt, you came at 3. I came at 3, Mrs. Stark." "Dr. Hewitt, thank you." Dr. Albert Hewitt of the small, careful South End office of Bear Hollow, Montana Territory, who had, at 7 in the morning of the Wednesday before, sent his own wife to the front door to turn a small 10-year-old boy away in the snow, put his own face into his own 2 hands, and did not, for one very long, careful second, take them away. When he did, he said, very low, "Mrs. Stark, I will not, on any morning of any year of the rest of my own careful life, refuse to ride out of the town limits of Bear Hollow, Montana. I will not, on any morning of any year of the rest of my own careful life, refuse to walk 6 blocks north on Main Street to a sick woman at a kitchen floor." "You have my careful word," Clem said, low and slow and dry. "Dr. Hewitt, I will hold you to it." Papa Jed, at Clem's own head, did not say a word. Papa Jed set his own big, careful forehead, gentle, against Clem's own careful cheek. Papa Jed did not, in the small, careful cabin at the south end of Main Street on the morning of the Thursday of November of 1885, cry. But he did, for one careful long second, close his own careful grey-blue eyes. The long night was over. Clem was sitting up in the small, careful bed Papa Jed had built for her at the back of the town cabin in the summer of 1881 by 6 that Thursday evening. She had slept the middle of the day away. She had woken at 3 that afternoon with a small, careful appetite for the first time in 3 days. Sarah Pratt had made her a small, careful bowl of Clem's own sourdough bread with a small, careful drop of honey. Clem had eaten half the bowl. Clem had gone back to sleep. Clem had woken again at 5:30 and had asked, in her own low, slow, dry voice, whether Levi was near. Levi had been asleep on the small braided rug in front of the iron stove since 11 in the morning. Papa Jed had set his own fur-lined buckskin coat over the small, careful sleeping boy of 10. Levi had not, on his own account, woken up until 5:30 that Thursday evening, when he had heard, from the back room of the town cabin, his own mama call his own name. Levi had come, in his own bare feet, to the back room. He had climbed up on the small, careful edge of the small, careful bed. His mama had put her own big, kind arm around him and had pulled him gentle against her own broad shoulder. Clem had said, low and slow but no longer dry. Levi Boone Stark, Levi had said. Mama. Clem had said, sweetness, come here. Levi had leaned his own small, careful head against his mama's own generous, soft frame, the way he had leaned his own small, careful head against his mama's own generous, soft frame, every night of his own 10 years of memory. He did not cry. Clem did not cry either. Big, kind women who have almost died and have come back and have had their own bravest, small, careful 10-year-old sons walk 6 miles in the snow to bring their own second husbands home from a ridge, do not cry, by their own careful count, in the first 6 careful hours of coming back to their own small, careful body. They just hold. They hold, for as long as the small, careful son will let them hold. That was what Clem did. She held her own Levi against her own generous, soft chest for the small, careful count of 11 whole minutes, without either of them saying a single careful word. Then Levi said, very quiet against his mama's own broad shoulder, one careful sentence. Mama. Yes, sweetness. Mama. I walked 6 miles. Clem set her own big, kind lips. Careful. On the top of the small red knit hat, Levi had not. In the 33 hours since he had walked out of the front door at 6:30 in the morning of the Wednesday, taken off. Clem said, very low, I know, sweetness. Mama, Mrs. Bunting said I was the small, careful, bravest boy of 10 in this valley. Sweetness. Mrs. Bunting was right. Mama. Yes, sweetness. Mama. Reverend Marsh read a small, careful verse. Sweetness. Reverend Marsh always reads a small, careful verse. Which one did he read? Reverend Marsh read a small, careful verse from the 13th chapter of the first letter of Paul to the Corinthians. Reverend Marsh read the small, careful verse about charity. Reverend Marsh read that charity beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Clem closed her own tired brown eyes for one long, careful second. She said, very low into the top of the small red knit hat, sweetness. You endured. You believed. You hoped. You bore the small, careful 6 miles because your own small, careful heart was full of the small, careful love of your own mama. That is charity, sweetness. That is the charity in that small, careful verse. You did the small, careful, hardest thing charity has ever asked a boy of 10 to do in this valley. And you did it because you love me. Levi did not say anything for one long, careful second. Then Levi said, in his small, steady voice, one careful sentence Clem had not, in the 4 years and 9 months of being Papa Jed's own big, brave wife, expected to hear. Mama, I love you. Clem, who had been a widow of one husband and had been the second wife of the tall, quiet mountain man of the high North Ridge, and had been the mother by adoption of a small, careful black boy of 10 for 7 whole years, had not, in the whole of those 7 careful years, heard Levi say those 3 careful words out loud. Levi had said them before. In every small, careful other way a small, careful boy of 10 can say them. Levi had said them with the small, careful drawing of a bear in a mountain man's coat at 5 years old. Levi had said them by climbing up on Papa Jed's own knee at the small back kitchen table at 6 years old. Levi had said them at 7 by riding up the ridge with his mama on Tuesdays and by playing with Holler on the porch. Levi had said them at 8 and 9 by not, on his own 10-year-old account, being a boy who ever asked to have anything his own family could not give him. Levi had said them, most of all, by walking, at 10 years old, 6 miles in the snow, in wrong-buttoned wool and wrong-laced boots up a ridge road, to a cabin he was not sure he could find, and to a papa he was not sure would be able to save his own mama. But Levi had not, before that Thursday evening, said them out loud in the small, careful 3-word English sentence. Clem set her own big, kind head, gentle, against the top of the small red knit hat. Levi Boone Stark, I love you too, sweetness. Papa Jed, at the doorway of the back room of the town cabin, did not walk in. Papa Jed stood at the door with his own tall, careful body against the small, careful frame, and his own big, careful right hand against his own big, careful mouth. Papa Jed did not, in his own count of the 47 careful years of his own life, cry. He did, at that door, at 10 to 7 in the evening of a Thursday in November of 1885, for one long, careful second, come very close. I will tell you one more thing. The bread mustard poultice recipe Sarah Pratt had written down on the back of Levi's own school notebook at the kitchen table on the Wednesday morning stayed in Sarah's own small, careful pocket for the rest of that November. Sarah copied the recipe out in her own careful hand on Sunday afternoon after service. Sarah gave the copy to Clem at the back kitchen table of the Pratt boarding kitchen at the small, careful Friday supper on the 27th of November. Clem took the copy. Clem set the copy inside the small leather-wrapped recipe book of Sarah Walking Owl on the high cedar shelf above the iron stove of the town cabin. The recipe stayed there for the next 24 years. Clementine Boone Stark, the big kind cook of the Pratt boarding kitchen of Bear Hollow, Montana, lived through the pneumonia of November 1885. She was on her own feet by the 3rd of December. She was back at the iron stove of the boarding kitchen by the 15th. She caught 2 more babies at the upper creek before the year was out. She lived 24 more years. She died of a small, quiet stroke at her own kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon in the autumn of 1909, with her own bread starter from Sarah Walking Owl still bubbling on the back of the iron stove. Levi Boone Stark grew up to be a big, kind, quiet black man of 6 feet even, the same height as his own dead father Nathan Boone, whom he had never really known. Levi took over the small, careful log school at the south end of Main Street from Mrs. Lottie Marsh in the autumn of 1898, at the age of 23. Levi married a small, careful Cheyenne schoolmistress named Bluefeather in 1902. Levi and Bluefeather had 4 small, careful children. The oldest was a girl. They named her Clementine. The second was a boy. They named him Jed. The third was a girl. They named her Sarah. The fourth was a boy. They named him Nathan, after Levi's own dead father from the South Fork Road. The small, careful walk of 6 miles in the snow at the age of 10 by Levi Boone Stark on the Wednesday morning of November of 1885 was told by the small, careful people of Bear Hollow at every small, careful kitchen table of every small, careful November for the next 37 Novembers. It was told to grandchildren by their own grandmothers. It was told to school children by their own teachers. It was told to freighters by their own wives at the small, careful supper table. It was told, one careful time, by the Reverend Tobias Marsh, from his own small, careful pulpit at the small, careful Methodist Church on the Sunday after Thanksgiving of 1885, from the small, careful 13th chapter of the first letter of Paul to the Corinthians, and the Reverend named all 3 names, and the town listened. That is the end of the story.